an unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Hudson Hammond, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, and we are broadcasting internationally as we are syndicated with Late Night in the Midlands from the United States and deprogrammed radio network in the United Kingdom. So if you live in the UK, specifically in London or Leeds, do check your local listings so you can hear this on terrestrial radio. And if you go to latenightinthe.midlands.com or Late Ellen, just search Late Night in the Midlands. I don't actually know the domain off the top of my head. I probably should. I believe it's lnmradionetwork.com. Just regardless, you will see the terrestrial stations. Before I announce my guest, let me give you a couple announcements. I know you all recall Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, the shock candidate running for United States Senate against Elizabeth Warren, also known as Pocahontas, is going to be back this Tuesday, but live. And the second hour, since he could only do 1 hour, it's going to be a sort of celebrity politician hour. Diamond Dallas Phillips, that is right, the first or second WWE guest if you count Governor Jesse Ventura. There are 3 people that cannot do live, so I'm asking you folks, if there's something specific you'd like to ask these people, let me know. Specifically first with Uri Geller, because I have to record his interview this weekend. So unfortunately, he will not be live as well. And Michael Dukakis, he will be back. Now this time I have to suck up and hold in my GOP talk as I've done for years until President Trump became president. And so I will be a Democrat for that hour only to cater to him. But if you folks have any questions for him, by all means, please send them to me. I have already received the first question, which is to ask him how the Democratic Socialists of America want to figure out how to pay for all the free things. So that'll be kind of interesting. And of course, Eric Von Doniken did also agree to he wants to come back because it's his 50-year anniversary from Chariots of the Gods Part 2 that he has written. So that's all the exciting news that I have for you today. Now, today we have another super stellar guest. He's really cool, really down to earth, and you'd have to be living under a rock to not know who he is, since he's really been out there for quite some time. On TV, he's one of the most well-known researchers in the United States and the world. He's actually a world-renowned researcher. He actually has, let me get it properly because I do not want to say it wrong. I know it's in North Carolina, the Asheville Mystery Museum and Laboratory as well. This is really cool. I'd really like to go to Puerto Rico. The Bermuda Triangle Research, I think I wrote center, regardless. That's where I really want to go to. But I'm going to bring him on, and he could tell us about these before I ask him the most basic question, and I think that'll be a really cool thing. Mr. Warren, Joshua Warren, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Dr. J. Hey, let me tell you something. It is a huge honor to be on your program. I'm extremely excited, and thank you so much for the invitation. You just have an incredible spectrum of topics on this show, so I know we're going to have a great conversation.
Oh, we absolutely will. I've been looking forward to having you on for quite some time, and even before I had that big block of not having shows. So you've been on my radar for quite some time. Now, I obviously didn't write the last word here after the Bermuda Triangle Research. What was that final word, or was it just Bermuda Triangle Research? Because I'd like to ask you about those 2 things you own.
Yeah, it's the Bermuda Triangle Research Center, which
Screw that up.
And since the big hurricane in Puerto Rico, our operations have sort of been pretty rocky there. I have, however, spent a large part of the past 15 years in Puerto Rico and most of the past 5 years. And so we have gathered so much incredible data about the Bermuda Triangle, but it's still hard to get back on track after that hurricane.
Oh, I would definitely imagine, and even in North Carolina, for your other research center, the Asheville Mystery Museum and Laboratory, because of it was called Florence, if I'm not mistaken. I would think that has also been somewhat affected, but maybe not to the extent of Puerto Rico. Is that correct?
Well, fortunately, Asheville is in the western part of the state, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and so there was some extra rain, but nothing like the devastation that the coast experienced. But it is kind of a strange thing. It's kind of a dark joke that hurricanes are sort of follow me around, it seems like, at this point. So you might not want to hang out with me. At least after I've left the place, you might want to avoid it for a while, because I'm in Puerto Rico, and then boom, a hurricane hits there. Then I go to North Carolina and a hurricane hits there. So now I'm joining you from the desert of Las Vegas, Nevada. If we get a hurricane here, oh boy, Armageddon is starting. The apocalypse is upon us.
I'm actually really glad you just clarified where you are, because I did forget to mention this. I wanted to give a shout out to Miss Pam Vredenberg, who's actually helping behind the scenes promote exactly you. And she wanted to ask about the hurricane in North Carolina. So the fact that you're in the Nevada desert is probably a good thing. And like you said, if a hurricane comes there, then I think we should talk to an astrologist and figure out if they're actually chasing you or something like that. Okay, let me ask you this. This is probably the most basic question anybody can ask a paranormal researcher. What first got you into paranormal?
Well, considering that Asheville, North Carolina is my hometown, I was extremely influenced by the environment because Asheville is the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, which are the oldest mountains in North America. And also, by the way, they have some of the purest quartz in the entire world there. NASA has gone there to basically mine quartz and grind it for optics. And my families on both sides, okay, father's side and mother's side, have been in Western North Carolina for hundreds of years. And so I grew up hearing all of these amazing stories, ghost stories, Native American tales, various folklore. And that was something that made me very curious about, how realistic those things could be. But there was one critical incident that I see as I get older more and more clearly, I think had a big impact on how I turned out and the path of my life. And this is an incident that actually happened before I was born. Ooh. So I'll try to make this as brief as possible, but it's a really interesting tale. So my mother, Peggy, is the youngest of 10 children, and her mother was named Virginia Calloway when I'm talking about my grandmother, of course. And Virginia Calloway was her maiden name, and when she was about 13 years old, it was in the midst of the Great Depression. And so my grandmother's family lived out in this really sweeping, beautiful rural area called Barnardsville, North Carolina, which is near Asheville. And they had a nice farmhouse. And for a while, it looked like they were going to do okay because they were better off than a lot of the other people in the area financially. But eventually they lost all their stuff as well. So anyhow, Virginia, this 13-year-old girl, she had an older brother who was in his 20s named Claude. Claude Calloway would therefore have been my great uncle. And their father was a man named Jack Calloway. And Jack and Claude, her father and brother, used to go out on these small game hunting trips. And Virginia, because the family was a little better off than most, got this wonderful birthday gift. I think it was the year she turned 13. She got a camera. She was the first person in the family to have a camera. And so she was experimenting, taking pictures. And so one day, Jack and Claude came out of the mountains from this hunting trip, and she asked them to pose for a photo. And she took a snapshot of them, these two rugged old mountain men standing there holding their rabbits and squirrels. And it was just a classic photo, which I saw when I was a little kid. But the weird thing is, Claude, her older brother, did not have a head in the photograph. Now, look, I'm not talking about some kind of a blur, like there was a long exposure and he was moving his head. I mean, it's literally transparent. You could see the brush behind him. Now, they knew that was weird, but they didn't understand enough about photography to grasp just how bizarre it truly was. So now let's fast forward 1 month later. This was July of, I believe, 1936. Claude is sitting on the porch reading a copy of his favorite publication, Western Magazine, these old gunslinger tales. Jack was in the kitchen fixing lunch, and the two were conversing through an open window. When lunch was ready, Jack walked outside. Here is Claude's magazine on the porch, but Claude was gone. And so Jack says, Claude, lunch is ready, and hours go by. Nobody sees Claude. Family members start coming home. The next day, they still haven't seen Claude, so they've got the authorities, they have the neighbors, everybody's combing the woods. My great uncle, Claude Calloway, was never seen or heard from again. This was a big tragedy in my family because they never had closure, and they could never explain how and why he seemed to vanish in mid-conversation while reading a story in a magazine and waiting for his lunch. And I think it's even creepier when you go back and realize that this photograph was taken a month before that shows him without a head. And there's one more thing I want to tell you now. When I became an adult, I went to Barnardsville. I interviewed every elderly person I could find who all gave me the same version of this story I've just told you. I hired I believe, the best forensic historian in the world named Vance Pollock, who went through the paper trail of Claude's, employment records and census records and all that. And the whole paper trail ends that day. And I can tell you that this instilled in me this sort of reality that, look, these strange stories about people being abducted or slipping into other dimensions or being raptured away or whatever, not to mention this photographic phenomenon, these are not just old stories. This is a reality that we have to face. And so I started taking this very seriously. And so at an early age, in my teens, I started writing and publishing about this. But it wasn't really until I was in my early 20s until I actually started seeing some stuff personally that blew my mind.
When you were talking about Claude with the head missing, I don't want to sound comical anyway, but the first thing that came to mind was Back to the Future. If you recall, when he went back to 1955 with the picture of his brothers and sisters, when he presented it to Dr. Emmett Brown, the very first thing was missing was the head. And just like you described, you could see the background, the brushery there. But that became even creepier when you talked about the fact that he literally disappeared. If he's conversing with Jack, who's making lunch, and he's reading his magazine, and no one sees him, and he's never returned, if this was an alien abduction, and because there's been a lot of abductees that I've interviewed over the years since I've really been, the two things that I pay attention to when it comes to UFOs are crash and retrieval and alien abduction, because I think that's where we'll find the most about them. But if this was an alien abduction, then I would think there'd be some missing time. People may have, maybe all of a sudden it's a few hours later, it's nighttime or something, but Claude would have been returned. The fact that he literally just disappeared and never was returned is probably really shocking, and is, of course, if you went down this path. And then you said you went and talked to all the elderly folks. Now, have you done anything to any other research or any way to contact him if he's presumably on the other side or with some other entities, like, for instance, I hesitate to say ghosts, unless he passed through that realm. But have you ever had any that wouldn't be right, an astrologist or a psychic maybe tell you they've located him?
That's a really interesting point you bring up, because over the years, I've known a number of so-called psychics, and I've worked with some of the psychics on television programs that have blown my mind, that have done things that I think cannot be explained as cold reading. But to be honest with you, I have never actually asked a psychic to tell me what happened to him. And I mean, I don't know why that has not occurred to me until just now, but now guess what I'm going to do? Thank you.
Ask a psychic, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, here's, obviously this is just pure speculation, because we can literally sit here and just think about where he possibly could have gone. And of course, some of the possibilities could be scary, very scary. From all the years that you've started researching all forms of paranormal, going back to when you first heard that story and saw that photograph, what possibly do you think may have happened to him based on your conclusions from studying? I mean, I know this is a very open case, but if you were just to pick what the most logical theory or logical explanation, what do you think that possibly could be, even though we'd be off?
Well, of course, there were plenty of people even then who said, "Hey, did Jack murder him? I mean, did he just run off?" I mean, all these things have been explored, and there's no evidence to support any of those things that some detective would jump to using Occam's razor. So, okay, now let's get into weird possibilities.
Yes.
In my career as a paranormal investigator, as a researcher, as an author, I can tell you that, like you were saying, what happened to him doesn't quite seem to fit into the typical kind of abduction scenario. And there are similar cases where other people seem to just, vanish, and sometimes in view, though, in the blink of an eye. And I have taken on a whole new view of this in lieu of this particular year of my life, because in June of this year, I was able to document what appears to be some kind of a time anomaly, what the media has coined a time warp near Las Vegas. And many of your listeners probably know about this because it became viral. Next thing I knew, this was in Newsweek and Inside Edition, and it was on the front page of Fox and ABC and NBC, and I got calls from Russia and China and all over the place. And basically, I documented this time anomaly, which we can talk more about later if you'd like, but I became convinced that there may be time anomalies, space-time anomalies, that are strewn around the planet, and that some of them may be subtle, meaning that you might just encounter one once in a while and you have a little sense of something like deja vu, and you're like, whoa, what was that? I thought that I'd already seen this. Or in some cases, it might be more extreme, where you see something from the past, like a ghost, or not just the ghost, but the ghost and the setting. You see the old house, you see the landscape, or even more extreme, where we're talking about time and space being manipulated in some fashion or changing in some fashion, and therefore the person literally is in such a space-time warp that person changes or is changed into another point in space. And all of that, to me, seems to make even more possible sense, because if you look at the state of North Carolina and you start there in Asheville and you draw a line east, and again, Barnardsville, where he disappeared, was near Asheville. If you draw a line east, very soon you'll hit the Brown Mountain Lights, and that whole area where these mysterious lights appear around this mountain is like a miniature Bermuda Triangle. You keep drawing that line east, and you finally hit this area they call the Devil's Tramping Ground, which is this big barren circle of land. No one can explain why nothing will grow there. They say when you put objects in the middle of it, the next morning they'll be moved outside of it. And the story is the devil walks in a circle there, mulling over what he's going to do to mankind, and he kicks stuff out. But anyway, you keep drawing that line east. You finally hit the coast of North Carolina, where so many ships have sunk and disappeared. They call it the graveyard of the Atlantic. You hit the island of Roanoke, which was the first attempt at an English settlement. They all disappeared, so we now know it as the Lost Colony. And then if you continue extending that line, you finally hit the island of Bermuda, which is the top point of the so-called Bermuda Triangle, which is, of course, famous for its disappearances. And so it may be that there is some kind of an alignment there that North Carolina is part of, where these space-time anomalies occur, and he might have just gotten whipped up in the equivalent of a space-time tornado, because I do believe there is some kind of interdimensional weather that can kick in at some of these places under various circumstances that we can't explain, and people can be displaced in space-time.
So it's actually really possible that he could have gone to literally another time, whether it be the past, the future, or through the Einstein-Rosen bridge wormhole to literally another dimension somewhere else.
I think it's more likely if you get caught up in one of these interdimensional whirlwinds that you probably go to another dimension altogether, because, we would probably hear from more people who have been displaced into the past on our timeline if they were just going back to another spot in the same timeline. He probably ended up in a completely different dimension or on a different timeline. And, the kind of conversation that we're having right now would have been not too long ago thought of as pure science fiction. But the funny thing is, today's smartest cosmologists and astrophysicists and mathematicians are saying, when we crunch the numbers, yeah, apparently there are other dimensions and all time is taking place at once, and we're just sort of experiencing it in one particular way from one particular point of view, and there's no reason to believe that a person can't be displaced.
You're absolutely right. It was science fiction for the longest time, even though, this was theorized back by Einstein. And I think it may be 10 years, give or take several years, that mathematicians theorized that there was up to 11 dimensions. And now we know even PBS is talking about the fact that, like you just said, there are different timelines and literally infinite dimensions. It is physically impossible to put a number to it because it never ends. And that is actually a really scary, not a scary thought, but that would really be mind opening on what is really out there when people absorb that thought. When you talked about drawing that line from Asheville all the way across to the island of Roanoke, which hit the top of the Bermuda Triangle, that mystery, the colony at Roanoke, was one of the ones that really stuck out to me from just History Channel because that large group literally disappeared. And like you said, they just disappeared. They didn't migrate. Things were left behind as if they got up in a hurry, yet there was no mass graves found. The local American Indians or indigenous Americans, some people speculated that they killed them, but no bones or clothing or anything was found to be like that. Since you've been a paranormal researcher, have you ever been tasked to look into that Roanoke civilization?
Well, I have been to the coast of North Carolina, but I have not been able to do any particular tests there. And it's funny that you bring this up, because the reason that I haven't been able to really properly test it is because I always felt like I just didn't have the right kind of equipment. And this is like a little itch that I haven't been able to scratch for years. And all that changed this particular year, because the reason I was able to find this anomaly outside of Las Vegas, which opens up a whole can of worms, is because I was contacted earlier this year by a Silicon Valley engineer named Ronald Heath. He's in his 60s. He's been working on all kinds of technology, electronics, and engineering for many years. And he is a big fan of the X-Files. And so he was particularly inspired by this one episode of the original X-Files where Mulder and Scully went to the site of a UFO encounter. And Mulder takes two stopwatches and he synchronizes them and leaves one at his car, and then he walks over and he investigates the site, and later he compares the two and he finds that they are different. And that's when he realizes there must be something about this site where the UFO was that changed the space-time continuum, that the relationship was warped or distorted in some way. And Ronald Heath thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to have a device that would do that? And so he created this brand new piece of equipment called the DT meter, which stands for Differential Time Rate Meter, that, and we can get into technical details of that if you'd like, but basically it compares 2 points and whether or not there's a time deviation. And I used that. I was the very first person he gave the opportunity to use this. He sent the first one to me. I went out. I was on my way to Area 51, and that's when I discovered this anomaly. And once I did that, I realized, man, I need to go back and revisit so many places that I've researched where people have disappeared, where things have sort of popped in and out of existence, and see if I can measure some kind of a time anomaly. And so right there at the top of my list has been to go to Roanoke Island, where the lost colony was lost, and see if there are these kinds of time distortions there, not to mention in the Bermuda Triangle in general. And so this is sort of a brand new approach, because nobody has ever had a user-friendly device that can do this before, and we're about to see some big new developments in this field.
I definitely agree, especially having more technology that would be able to answer more questions. And I guess since you did open the door to two things earlier, the first, the time warp, and the DT meter, I might as well go last in, first out. I want to know if you can talk to us about how exactly does the DT meter work?
Well, so the DT meter, if you hold it in your hand, it consists first off of a little blue plastic box that has a display on it that looks like a calculator display, and it says 0.0000000. I think it's got 8 zeros, and then it's connected to a 100-foot cable, and on the other end of that cable is a sensor. Now, the sensor and the meter have the exact same type of little oscillating chip in them that come from the same manufacturer. They should be exactly identical. And so when you hold the sensor next to the meter and you calibrate the thing, they are operating identically. So the meter is basically reading 0 with a margin of error, which we take into account. So then you stretch that coil out for 100 feet, and theoretically, you're still supposed to get a reading of 0. You're not supposed to get any kind of a deviation as those 2 points are compared. And yet, on this particular day, June 18th of 2018, I picked up a deviation. According to this device, time slowed for 25 microseconds per second. So in other words, what that kind of means is that if you were to take a second and slice it into 100,000 little pieces, which is almost unimaginable, 25 of those slowed down for a moment. Now, the weirdest thing about that to me is that I was on my way to Area 51 from Las Vegas to spend the night there and come back. And along the way, I would stop about every 20 miles and take readings. And I thought that, okay, wouldn't it be cool if, as I get closer to Area 51, I get more and more deviations, because they're working on some alien technology there, like Bob Lazar said, that might be warping space and time. Well, it turns out I didn't get anything weird around Area 51. It was this nondescript spot on the side of the road in the desert, 20 miles north of Vegas, where I got this anomaly. And then I found out afterward that spot just so happens to be one of the most intense UFO hotspots in all of Las Vegas, or Nevada for that matter, where some of the most stunning footage of UFOs has been filmed, especially by researchers like Steve Barone, and people have had extreme close encounters. One man, for example, named Sean Kevin Jason, had a close encounter at that spot with a huge black triangle in 1996, and I met him, and he took me out to that spot just to make sure. He even had a model with him of the UFO that he had made, and said, yes, this is where I had this encounter. And just last night, I heard from a trucker who said he recently was driving through that spot and had a UFO appear behind his truck. And I began to say, this is unbelievable that this one spot where I happened to pull over, because they were doing road construction and there were cones and barrels that were blocking a lot of the areas. This one spot just so happens to coincide with all of these experiences. And that's when I thought, my God, what if we keep going around and measuring, and if we find more of these anomalies and we compare them to places where people have had strange experiences, whether it's something ghostly or UFO oriented or whatever, what if we keep finding that kind of a connection and we overlay that? Will this reveal a pattern to us that will show us something new about the relationship between the mysterious and space-time anomalies?
Some people talk about ley lines and certain ley lines having more energy, being more magnetic, or whatever it is. I don't know the technical terms. However, if you believe Bob Lazar, which I truly believe, and he really does a good job in the Lazar tapes, his own documentary that he produced probably, I believe, in 1991 after he made the rounds, he talks about that every single craft, and if you pay attention to footage, how they blink out or just literally come in out of nowhere, that they're never traveling from point A to B. They're not traveling at the speed of light or anything like that. They're literally interdimensional time travel vehicles, because back in Einstein, when he first theorized the Einstein-Rosen bridge, he also talked about the theory of relativity, that if you can affect a gravitational change on the time-space continuum, by default, you are a time traveler, hence an interdimensional, you creating your own Einstein-Rosen bridge wormhole to get from point A to B. Where you found this time warp in Nevada, where there's a hot spot of UFO activity, do you think that this is just a natural occurrence? Why that craft is literally coming in and out at that specific location? Or do you think it's possibly that they put it there to make it easier to travel? Because if I was to just speculate, I would think that there are spots around the world that are hot spots that these craft are zipping in and out of.
Well, you just asked the golden question there, because this is where we open the can of worms. First off, I believe that we will find, now that this technology, this user-friendly technology is available, and by the way, I am not selling DT meters, and I have no financial arrangement or no vested interest in those, so I don't want anybody to think I'm trying to hawk this new thing. But I'm telling you, now that this new user-friendly device is available and researchers can get a hold of it, as we spread out around the planet, I believe that we are going to start finding that there are places that naturally produce space-time anomalies to some degree, and eventually that's not going to be such an extraordinary thing. However, in this particular case, when it comes to what I discovered in Nevada, I have seen this amazing timeline of events, both before and since, that have given this perhaps some greater context. And I know that you probably want to take a break at some point. So do you want me to get into this timeline now?
Absolutely. Yeah, we got about 25, 30 minutes till the break. Don't worry. Keep going. Absolutely. We're on a roll.
Okay. All right. So I want everybody to be objective and just listen to this timeline and see if you think this is coincidence or not. All right. So December of 2017 is when the Pentagon finally, one way or another, who knows how this happened, they announced that they had been basically back engineering UFO debris, and this is called part of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. And this was the product of, the main politician, Harry Reid from Nevada, having a contract with Robert Bigelow, who owns Bigelow Aerospace here in Las Vegas, and they claimed that they had buildings they'd modified here in the Las Vegas area to work on this debris. Okay, so now let's skip to early June of this year. Early June, NASA announced that they had found, quote, complex organic material on Mars. Very interesting. Now, later on June 18th of 2018, the same exact day that I discovered this anomaly, call it a time warp, whatever you want, I checked into my motel out in the middle of nowhere and turned on the TV, and here I see President Trump saying we are creating the Space Force. I thought, how
That's
interesting.
right, yeah.
That I'm next to Area 51 and I found this anomaly, and now the president's saying we're creating a Space Force. The following month, on July 25th, NASA announced they'd found an underground lake on Mars. Also, that very same day, on July 25th, George Knapp, who is a journalist here in Nevada, he somehow obtained and released this letter that Senator Harry Reid had written to the Office of the Secretary of Defense dated June 24th of 2009. And this letter is earth-shattering because in this letter, he is asking for a higher level of security clearance based upon the findings of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And I have this letter in front of me. Anybody who wants to read it, I have a PDF you can freely download on my website, joshuapwarren.com. Here are some quotes. This is Harry Reid, and he says, much progress has been made with the identification of several highly sensitive, unconventional aerospace-related findings. He goes on to say, given the likelihood these technologies will be applied to future systems involving spaceflight, weapons, communications, and propulsion, the standard management and safeguarding procedures for classified information are not sufficient. He then goes on to say, associated exotic technologies likely involve extremely sophisticated concepts within the world of quantum mechanics, nuclear science, electromagnetic theory, gravitics, and thermodynamics. And given that all of these have the potential to be used with catastrophic effects by adversaries, an unusually high degree of operational security and read-on discretion is required. Now, let me point out a couple things here real quick. Not only is he saying we have some exotic technology which applies to all of these phenomenal areas, but he's saying if this falls into the hands of our adversaries, then this could be catastrophic. So he's claiming right there, okay, we didn't have it, we discovered it, and it didn't come from anybody else because we don't want them to get it. So where the heck do you think it came from? This letter, again, it's earth-shattering. You've got to read this for yourself. But let's get back to the timeline. So that came out on July 25th, and here's the last thing that I'll point out to you. Then in August of this year, it was announced that the Air Force has been experimenting with and dropped a new type of Earth-penetrating nuclear gravity bomb at Nellis Air Force Base right beside my time warp location. And guess when they were doing that? In June of 2018. So I could keep going, but do you not think it is a little bit more than coincidence that we're seeing a pattern here of information about other intelligence out there, about technology that is coming from them, and all of a sudden these amazing new advances are taking place right here in this Nevada area, which happens to coincide with not only the place but the time when I got that space-time anomaly. That's a lot to digest, but boy, it's something to chew on, isn't it, Dr. J?
It absolutely is, and I have to read that letter because when you were reading it, it's really mind-blowing. And I got to tell you, I honestly, truly expected something like this to come out at some point in time, whether leaked or some way or another. Let me say a couple things first of all. Even if you apply Occam's razor to this, clearly this is far more than a coincidence. Pattern, obviously, more likely. Another thing, well, you talked about finally using different technologies, because the way we've been traveling to space, our cars, everything, internal combustion engine. I mean, seriously, with all the technology, we've been able to, well, depending on who you believe, we've been able to put a man on the moon. We have all this amazing stuff. I mean, smartphones, more powerful than any computer you could have had 20 years ago in your pocket. Yet, not only are we using technology that goes back 150 years, it actually goes back to 800 AD with Chinese, literally burning chemicals to create propulsion. So it's actually really refreshing to hear that we're finally going to open this new door. Now, here's a little concern I've had, and maybe you know about it, or I guess we really won't know until the Space Force is created. I don't know. I think you probably have seen this. To me, it was kind of shocking because I'd already assumed there was a military space program because of a family member who works in the private military contractor arena. He was able to confirm for me that we've had space drones for quite some time. But it wasn't until a few years ago I was watching ABC World News, and they just broke in to a breaking story that here at Edwards Air Force Base, in Southern California, they were witnessing a recording. I guess the camera crews clearly had knowledge because they were there long before this drone was landing. And it was the first time they acknowledged a space drone. So you see this drone coming in. It's sort of dark. This happened, I believe, in sometime in winter because it was dark out here as well. It's a pure black craft, unmanned. And it just lands, and you just see, breaking news, space drone lands at Edwards. And then it just switches back to normal programming. The very next day, I'm searching for it. I'm telling everybody about it, and they just miss it. Back to my concern. I have a fear that the Space Force, a lot of people are going to want to be astronauts, but instead, we're going to probably end up using a bunch of space drones. So you'll have a bunch of high school kids fresh out of high school at Nellis instead of doing the actual thing. Do you think that's probably going to happen? I'm sure there's going to be some human astronauts, but not to the scale that we once had.
Oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And I mean, think about it. If you were in charge of it, wouldn't you do the same thing? I mean, you'd be like, yeah, we don't need to risk lives. And not only that, I mean, look at the resources that you have to load on there just to keep a person healthy. I mean, they have to eat, they have to drink, they have to relieve themselves. You got to have enough oxygen for them to breathe. It's got to be pressurized a certain way. I mean, this is a bunch of extra bulk, which is completely unnecessary if you can automate the whole thing. And the big problem has always been power supply. And to make all this even more extraordinary is that this letter that Harry Reid wrote has an appendix. And this appendix lists the 38 topics of interest that they have been specifically researching. And each one of them also lists the name of the scientist in charge and the university or other type of institution that the scientist is associated with. And I have this list in front of me, and I'm not going to read all 38, but I will read you some of these topics. Just listen to this. Now, I want everybody to know this is verified. This has been validated. This is not something fake. It's not phony. You can do your own research. I know you will, and verify. Okay, listen to some of these topics. One is invisibility cloaking. The other is, okay, here's another. Advanced space propulsion based on vacuum. That makes sense. Wormholes in space-time. That's number 8. Number 9 is gravity wave communication. Number 19 is warp drives, dark energy, and dimensions. Number 20 is brain-machine interfaces. Let's see. Number 25 is laser weapons. Number 26 is quantum entanglement communication. Number 36 is ultra capacitors as energy and power storage devices. Number 37 is negative mass propulsion. And you know what number 38 is, Dr. J?
You've listed off a lot that I would have suggested, but no. What is it?
Redacted.
Oh, of course.
Can you believe it? After all that?
Yeah, 37 are laid out in day. And as you're listing these, this reminds me of seeing Bob Lazar in 2015, the first time he actually spoke at a conference. And he literally said, some of the exact same terms you mentioned. He said that the moment we are able to create an artificial gravity wave such as these craft there, and if you are familiar with the story that when he was working on the so-called sport model that he labeled as, there was also one of those gravity generators in that little hangar that had been removed from one of the other craft. He always says that whatever science fiction you could throw away that afternoon, which becomes science fact. And he goes on to say that force fields are going to be possible, invisibility, the Einstein-Rosen bridges, wormholes, time travel, all these things. And actually, what if that redacted one is time travel? That is one to consider, but you really can get there just from an Einstein-Rosen bridge. That's the part that's really shocking. So the question is because Bob Lazar, even in 2015, even though he hadn't been there in 23 years, when George Knapp asked him, have we created anything from the extraterrestrial craft that you worked on? He's like, no. And everyone's laughing like, they're trying to ask a serious question here. And he says it would be equivalent to taking an iPhone and dropping it off in the wagon train days and with an unlimited budget and say, here, give us 20 at the end of the week. My guess or my question to you is, do you think that something happened where they had a breakthrough at possibly S4, or maybe were given the technology from some extraterrestrials? Because it sounds like everything Bob Lazar was trying to accomplish from 89 to 90 seems to be found by now and ready to be used in practice through the Space Force.
Well, for one thing, and I just listed some of the stuff on this list. So, and that stuff is pretty amazing. So, yeah, who can imagine what 38 is? But that said, I had the privilege a few years ago of speaking for, I think, the second time at the International UFO Congress. And that was the first time, the only time to my knowledge, where Bob Lazar took the stage and was actually interviewed live on stage. I was just a few rows back about his experiences. And I believe that was maybe the same
2015.
night.
That was the day we were both there, yeah.
Were you there also? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, the Academy Awards were happening around that time, and I thought that if that guy is lying, he deserves the Oscar, because he seemed so genuine and so sincere and so believable. I think what he is talking about is true. That's just what my gut tells me. Now, that said, I do think that there have been enormous breakthroughs. Of course there have. Why else would Harry Reid have written that letter where he is saying, oh my God, we've made so much progress that we need to take these extreme security measures, and he breaks it down pretty specifically. And of course, he was the Senate Majority Leader at that time. I believe that, therefore, what we can deduce is that when it gets to this point of sensitivity, the compartmentalization becomes compartments within compartments. It breaks right down to, there's only a handful of people out there who probably have anything close to the big picture. And so, and even Bob Lazar gave us a sense of that. Like, you're supposed to work on this one little thing and you do your part, but nobody has, most people don't have the big picture when you're just working as an engineer. And so there are very few people who are able to assemble all this and put it together. And therefore, they have put something together. It may not be anywhere close to the actual perfection that we've seen from these ET/interdimensional beings, but it is good enough to be vastly superior to anything that certainly any other country has, or anything that we have had previously.
And again, this is exactly what we was just talking about with Bob Lazar. When you said that you believe, I believe too. Some of the things that people have tried to use against him, for instance, Stanton Friedman, I always hold this debate with him. And I respect him, because Stanton Friedman does not want to go against his age and really change his story where he can get attacked by some of the skeptics. But when he says, Bob Lazar, he checked his high school record, and Bob was a C student. Then he says he did not find him in those universities, which, big surprise, right? But he did see that he was an average student at Pierce College. Well, if people are familiar with me, I was a horrible student in high school. I went to several because I was a troublemaker and coming into my own. I, too, went to Pierce College, and I wasn't a great student. It wasn't until I hit UCSB that I really started to pay attention and ended up in some of the top law schools that you can get into at the West Coast. So everything that Stanton Friedman says about Bob Lazar and the reason why he can't believe him is, I hate to say it, Stan, but it's a little bit of hogwash. I mean, because I can just prove that you can have mediocre grades in high school and still end up at a place like MIT or Caltech. Now, back to this Area 51, because S4 is located at Area 51, do you think that, the breakthrough, first of all, that time warp, one thing that when you were talking about it, how you found it, I'm surprised it wasn't part of a facility. I would have thought the government would have jumped on that. The only thing I would think is, do you think they possibly don't even know about it? But that'd be pretty hard, though.
Well, since that nobody prior has been running around with this device, I mean, I was the first guy to get to do this. This was not a consideration. I mean, I think it'd be sort of like if you were the first person to get a pair, the first civilian, let's say, to get a pair of third generation night vision goggles and go out, looking at the sky in 1990. I mean, you would have seen all kinds of secret stuff that is now being cloaked because they now know that anybody can buy a pair of third generation night vision goggles for $1,000. And so, I mean, I had the advantage, at least that day, of being the first person to go out at this highly active spot. And by spot, I'm talking about this whole area around Vegas and Nellis and Area 51, and use this device. And I think that it's possible. I mean, you get into this chicken or egg dilemma. It's possible that this has always been sort of one of those hot spots, which is one of the reasons that makes this area so appealing to the military, because the military dominates the state of Nevada. Or it could be that they are conducting experiments that are creating these sort of space-time anomalies that humans are not supposed to be able to create. I mean, the anomaly that I picked up, according to the traditional textbooks in the classroom, should only occur if a black hole is approaching Earth. And as far as we know, that's not happening right now. That's a pretty extreme thing. And so, you have to wonder if what I discovered there was something that they are creating, or are they setting up, and doing experiments here because it's such a conducive environment. And one thing that might speak to this is when I made my trip, my overnight trip to Area 51. And by the way, going to Area 51 is not like going to Disneyland. I mean, this is not some kind of people might think, oh, there's a little alien. Yeah, it's a little diner in the middle of nowhere. You have to drive 2.5 hours from my house in Vegas to get there. There's nothing. It's just desert. There was a sign at one point that said next gas station is 73 miles. There's no cell phone service. It's very dangerous. But when you get out there, I discovered that there are petroglyphs on the rocks that I'd never heard of this before, that go back thousands of years, of a figure that they call Paranagat Man. And Paranagat Man looks like some kind of an alien robot. He's all over the rocks up in the mountains there. He looks like he has a big sort of rectangular torso and an antenna on his head and these two big eyes. And I'm going to spell Paranagat real quick in case anybody wants to look this up. It's a hard one. It's spelled P-A-H-R-A-N-A-G-A-T. Let me do that one more time. P-A-H-R-A-N-A-G-A-T. Or if you go to my website and you click the link there in the menu that says Gallery of the Strange, I have all kinds of weird stuff. And there's a section called the Vegas Interstate Time Anomaly, and you can see some of my videos there. And I have Paranagat Man featured. This looks like some kind of an alien being to me. And I have no idea why indigenous peoples thousands of years ago would have carved something like this around this same area, which we now know as Area 51. So it could be that this has been a very active area for a long time, and that's one of the things that attracted the military to this spot.
It would definitely seem to indicate so, because, one thing that I always discuss with Eric von Däniken, which is pretty basic, an argument for the people who really are closed-minded, is why would you have all these different civilizations talking about men from stars, giving them wisdom, or having depictions of these non-human entities? Clearly, this is not all mythology. And one thing Eric points out as far as physical handwriting, the very first people to have ever learned to do so were scholars, priests, kings, or princes, the aristocrats of society. And this is such a basic argument. It just blows my mind how most people don't even think about this. Do you really think that those people who were tasked to write the very first things are going to tell a mythological story? They would have their heads cut off. Literally, if they're not writing what the king wants them to write, or the pharaoh, or wherever they are, or these elders in the American Indian or in indigenous American groups, if they don't write what's really happening, then of course they're going to be in trouble, I would think, because why are they going out of their way to depict the Paranagat man other than that being was visiting them time and time again? When you see a petroglyph, people out there, the indication that I've always taken is that these people were trying to let those who came further down their tribe, or any visitor who came to that area, just so you know, in this area, this thing comes out. That's what it sounds like to me. Now, about Area 51, Joshua, do you know what the history is as far as American military getting involved there? Because if this figure was literally in a petroglyph there, then I would have think that the traditional story that the SR-71 pilots are talking about probably doesn't fit.
Well, it may not. The traditional story. Well, for one thing, to this day, officially, Area 51 doesn't exist. I mean, the government has acknowledged that there is a base there where operations are happening, but they have not ever actually specified, well, we have a place called Area 51. So officially, nobody knows what happens there. I do know a couple of things. Every weekday, at very least, there's a whole series of planes. They're called the Janet planes that are only identified by a red stripe, that fly from Las Vegas up to Area 51 and back, bringing maybe over 1,000 people. I don't know. And they say, of course, that in the 1950s, this sort of base was established there. If you are a civilian pilot and you get too close to the restricted airspace, the tower there that tells you to turn around identifies itself as Dreamland. That's the name they use. And so, the story is they set up some kind of a base there in the 1950s, and we know by just, clear anecdotes that have come out from many, many people that they've been testing equipment there since then. But it could be that the research there goes far beyond. But honestly, it's been so secretive. People have been killed in the past for even talking about it. So, it's a mystery to everyone.
I'm glad you mentioned Janet Airlines. I was really trying to find one to photograph it when I was at McCarran about a month ago, but I couldn't find it. I know they exist, obviously, like you said, and it's identifiable, that red stripe. And like you said, there has to be, because that plane literally goes back and forth. And I believe they have more than one jet, right?
Yeah, they do. They have a bunch of them, and I've seen them. I mean, I think I always keep a dash cam, on my car, and there have been at least a couple occasions when my wife and I have been driving down the road, and we're like, "Oh, look, there's one of the Janets!" We turn the dash cam. So I probably have some images, but it's well known. It's a whole separate section of McCarran that is restricted and used only for that purpose. And I mean, they're sending so many people there. And again, I would say easily over 1,000. Nobody knows for sure. And that's in addition to how many people live there. So there is a huge, huge operation happening there. But again, officially, it's some kind of a military installation, and that's it.
You're absolutely right. They won't go into any more detail at that. And for that fact, you also have the security that works there is not really part of any government branch. I believe it's Wackenhut is the enterprise that run the private security there. And going back to Bob Lazar back in 2015 at the UFO Congress, do you recall when he said to George Knapp, when he said, "What else?" George said to him, "What else do you know that you're not telling us?" And he said, "I've told you everything. The only thing I'm not telling is this list of 22 names. That way, if someone comes out in the future, he can verify." With all these people working at Area 51, I would hope somebody works at S4 and starts to talk soon. Have you ever come across anybody that you think is another sort of Bob Lazar, or at least possibly worked there?
Well, I have had these weird encounters in Las Vegas. I think the weirdest I had was last year, where it's one of those things where my wife and I go out to a bar and we're sitting there and we're having a drink and we're about to order some food. And then there was one guy, this is the first time that really struck me, sat down next to me and, and all of a sudden he struck up a conversation, which is not uncommon. And he said, where are you from? I said, I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. And he said, oh, I was just in Asheville a week ago. And so he starts telling me all about Asheville. And then he says to Lauren, where are you from? And she says, well, I'm from Katy, Texas. And he goes, I was just in Katy, Texas. And he starts talking all about Katy, Texas. And then he starts talking and talking and talking. And the more he talks, the more we realize this guy knows who we are. Okay. And so finally, I just, I started grinning. I found this kind of humorous. And I said, so who are you? What is this about? And he basically at that point said, I'm here to talk to you about the research that you're doing. And I said, okay. And he asked me to go into the restroom. And so we went to the restroom and we continued talking at that point. And he said to me, and by the way, Dr. J, this is the very first time I've ever said this publicly. It makes me a little nervous, frankly, to be honest with you. I have my own podcast. It's a little short one. It could be 5 minutes or 10 minutes that I do just about every day just to update people on my work. I've never even talked about this on my podcast. And he said to me, the first thing he said was, do you think that you would be qualified to work on any of this debris that you've read about in the media? And I said, yeah, absolutely I do. And he said, why do you think that? And so I gave him my answer. And he said, that's the best answer I've ever heard. And then he goes, would you be willing to be subcontracted by the United States government to look at some of this stuff? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take whatever opportunity I can get to see this stuff. And so then that was pretty much the end of it. He goes, okay, and we hung out for another hour or two. And then I only know his first name. And I've never seen him or heard from him again. And so I don't know, what I can tell you is that I meet a lot of crazy people, okay? But this was not a crazy person. This was somebody who knew who I was, who knew who my wife was, who knew very specific details, like very, very subtle personal things about my background and her background. And I have wondered ever since, like, how seriously were they looking into possibly recruiting me to look at some of this material? And I don't think it'll ever happen because, for one thing, I am in the media. Look, I just told you that story, and I'm sure somebody's listening and somebody won't like it. But I have met a number of people who, to a lesser degree, have indicated to me that they are involved with that kind of research here in this area.
20, 30 years ago, I probably would have thought this would have been a Men in Black. And that is half the question right now. The other half, I am not surprised because of all the surveillance. And it does seem to me that people who are researchers, similar to hackers, right? You have a hacker who does something illegal, gets caught, and what do? They flip him, give him a big check, and boom, give him an NSA badge. I think you probably, this is just a guess, of course, you probably were getting really close to the truth. What better way to bring you in, get you to sign those non-disclosures, and expose you to a little bit more in hopes that they can keep you there with your knowledge that you've already had instead of talking to the public. Now, this incident happened, but has no follow-up, I'm assuming.
Well, nothing to that extent, but I will tell you this. When I released my findings about this space-time anomaly, the first media to cover this was the local Fox station here in Las Vegas. They sent a reporter with me back out to the site, and this thing aired on the 6 o'clock news, and within, I would say, 90 minutes, all of a sudden, every electronic device that I have, my laptops, I have a couple of cell phones for different purposes, started sending me alert, you're being hacked, change your password. And I'm like, what the heck, and I was like, look at this, Lauren. My wife's name is Lauren. I was like, look at this. I'm getting on, somebody's trying. So I had to go in, and I've got a very good security system in place on all my devices anyway, because I'm a very, media-oriented guy, and I don't want some virus or whatever. And I sure enough, I had to go in and just like change all my passwords and rearrange everything and scan everything. And after that, for days, I kept getting these warnings that somebody was trying to hack my systems. Our internet access was all wonky, and even our cable TV was weird. And then it got even stranger because I would get on an elevator somewhere. And I know I'm sounding like I'm completely paranoid at this point, but I'm telling you, I would get on an elevator and people would say things to me who had no idea who I was, would say something about time warp. And I'm like, huh? And then I got on an elevator one time and this guy said, hey, how are you doing? I said, oh, I'm doing great. And he said, so how long have you lived here? And I'm like, how does this guy know that I haven't, been in this area very long? And I said, I've been, we got our place here a few months ago. And he goes, how often do you go back to Asheville?
Whoa.
And I was like, huh? Now look, I know a lot of people out there in this field know who I am, but I'm not some kind of celebrity where I get on an elevator wearing a ball cap and people look at me and know who I am, all right? And this guy said my hometown. And so I at some point I said, how did you know I was from Asheville? And he goes, oh, I'm really good at picking up on things. And he kind of winked at me and walked out the door. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? There was another occasion when, I had a, let's see, I had a, I've got the package in front of me right now. I had a package sent to me. Yeah, I'm holding it in my hand right now. I had a package sent to me with a book, and the book was about the UFO encounter that Sean Kevin Jason had at that site in 1996. It was a book I ordered from Amazon. That's all it was, but I ordered it a couple days after that. The book, the package was outside my door. I'm holding this in my hands right now. The package was opened very neatly. You can see somebody took a letter opener and just went, and I was like, what the heck? Why is this open? So I reach in and I see the book, and there is a note inside. And the note, I'm holding the note in my hand right now. It's a handwritten note on a scrap of paper, and it says, hey, buddy, package was sitting in front of my door. I didn't even pay attention. Sorry, didn't realize it had your name on it. There's no indication of who wrote this, where it came from. This has never happened before. And I'm like, okay, is all this coincidence? Am I just being paranoid? This kind of stuff started just clustering around this major media coverage that I was getting back in June and July for this time-space discovery or time or space-time anomaly discovery right there at the same moment when they were experimenting with God knows what next door at Nellis Air Force Base.
I want to say a question, or I guess you could say a speculation of the two possibilities. First of all, within 90 minutes, if this thing started happening to you with all your electronic devices, obviously someone had to be paying attention at the top. And this could go two ways, what I'm about to say. One, within 90 minutes, you have all these warnings coming on to change your password, which one, you could look at someone's trying to hack, let me change my security. What if the inverse is true? What if those warnings came because you were hacked already and they wanted you to change the passwords in the ClearNet so they can have them? That way, what if even now you may think you're secure, but you're really not? Now, that's an open-ended question, and I wanted to save that for the break. Of course, comment on whatever you want on it, and I do want you to plug in your event. I know this is two totally disconnected things, but I do want to take that break before we pick up more on the cool stuff. So What do you say of those two different possibilities? Of course, how the heck would we ever know? But it's interesting to speculate on the possibility that you, my friend, are being watched.
Well, you know what? I think that I, and probably most of us, but certainly myself, am being watched by the government regardless. That's what all the whistleblowers have been trying to tell us, that it's so easy to do that. And so therefore, I am under no delusion that I have any sort of privacy. Anything that I do on the internet, I mean, talking to you right now, you know how many appearances that I do. I have the fortune of being invited to go on a lot of different TV shows and radio shows, and because these days I go on live programs, and if I toss something out here right now, boom, it's out there. The Pandora's box has been opened, the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. They know that. So the best they can do is see how I'm preparing. What am I possibly going to talk about? And so that's sort of the double-edged sword of having this technology, where these days we can have the freedom to, in this country, speak instantly in an uncensored manner to thousands or millions of people. But at the same time, because of that, there are real security procedures that need to be in place, and they are going to do whatever they have to monitor you and to watch you. And I want people who are listening to this program to understand, I am not some kind of a government basher. I'm not a whistleblower. I mean, I do not want to talk about anything that jeopardizes the security of this country. I love this country. I'm proud to be a citizen of this country. Again, my family has been here for hundreds of years. And if I accidentally stumbled into something that was going to jeopardize the security of this country, and some official showed up and said, don't talk about this because this is going to possibly jeopardize something, I wouldn't do it. I would be glad to comply. So, I don't think that we should necessarily look at Big Brother as always being some bad thing. But I do understand why that they're monitoring you, Dr. J, while they're monitoring me. But I also realize that that's a slippery slope. Once that starts, it's very easy to abuse. And this is the conundrum of living in the information age. How do we, draw that line?
And it really is, especially right now, since you just told something that you said you've never told publicly, which was that visitation that you had by this official with you and your wife, Lauren. That would be probably one of the absolute scary things that I think would ever happen to me. Before we go to the break, you're going to be in my hometown, Los Angeles, on the 13th. I wanted to give you two opportunities to make sure we plug this in. I know we've on a different topic and we're going to come back to that right after break, but I wanted you to talk about being here next week.
Well, thank you very much. And you know what? Those topics are actually more related than one might think, because I'm talking about exotic technologies, controversial technologies, and one of the areas that I love to research is this area called psionics, psychotronics, or radionics. I'm talking about mind machines. These are controversial and experimental devices. A lot of people call them wishing machines, and we can talk more later about what that means and what those are. But basically, I am I actually am the co-creator of the Wishing Machine Project, where we are keeping track of thousands of people around the world who are using these things called wishing machines in order to try to manifest things in their lives. Doesn't matter what it is. Could be, something very positive. Could be something very scary. I've used them to try to help enhance paranormal phenomena. Some people use them to get more money or to have a better relationship or, all that kind of stuff you hear about in infomercials. You can use them to try to help you focus and manifest things. And nobody knows how they work. It may be the world's greatest placebo. I don't know. But we have had astounding success rates with these. And so I have traveled from North Carolina, presenting about this, to Sedona, Arizona. My last stop, my final wishing machine extravaganza is going to be on Saturday, October the 13th. That's 10 days from now in Hollywood. And look, it's going to be at the Ruby Theater, and I want everybody listening who has an interest in this to come out there and see me. If you go to joshuapwarren.com and you click the link at the top in the yellow letters, then you can learn more about what this is. I've got some videos there talking about it, and I promise you, if you go to this thing and you do not like it, or if it does not completely blow your mind, then I will give you your money back, no questions asked. I'm happy to do it. So I'm hoping many of your listeners will see me for my last Wishing Machine Extravaganza, October 13th in Hollywood.
I'm really glad you opened that door to the Wishing Machine, because just yesterday I came across a video on that. So I want to talk about that when we get back. Everybody stay tuned. More from Joshua P. Warren in 3.5 minutes. We'll be right back.
There are days that the red pill is bitter in my stomach, but I can't get it back out. I think because I have to. I speak because I have no choice. I walk through this dark age we're in with open eyes. Listen to Open Eyes on LateNightInTheMidlands.com. And together, maybe we won't stumble and fall.
Data. The sensors can't penetrate the planet's ionosphere. There's too much interference. Can you find a way to scan for life forms?
I would be happy to, sir. I just love scanning for life forms. Life forms. You tiny little life forms. You precious little life forms. Where are you?
Even the ETs know this is the place to be. L&M Radio Network.
You can listen to the L&M Radio Network 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through the Paranormal Radio app. Available from lnmradionetwork.com or TalkStreamLive.com on both Android and Apple. Our call to listen line is open 24/7. Dial 701-719-9704 so you can listen on the go.
Ever wanted to be sure your robot slave was behaving? Is Echo getting out of control and meeting with Alexa when you're not around? You need RoboGrog. RoboGrog is the new product from Snooze You Lose, the company that also brought you the fine products of Flog a Horse and Calm You Down Now. RoboGrog will put your robotic minions to sleep, bringing their AI a sense of peace and comfort. It does this by sending bolts of electricity straight where the sun doesn't shine. Get RoboGrog today at any fine retailer and set yourself free from the devices that bind you.
You can't just throw someone into prison and silence their warning because you don't agree with them. You don't have to like my methods or what I stand for. Silencing me won't make the problem go away. It will just whittle away at the ability of people to be ready for the real threats. And when the worst happens, and it will, maybe you can take comfort in protecting the people from a dangerous radical who wanted to tell them the truth.
Tired of searching for great talk and great information? Look no more. L&M Radio Network, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Back home, there's a growing pro-Earth movement. Rumors of hate groups targeting aliens. And on all sides, the fanatics think that society has to be protected against anyone who's different. I'm starting to wonder if what we just saw is a preview of things to come.
Oh, I can't believe you'd be that foolish. Santayana. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Okay, welcome back to, I would say second half, but it's a little more past that of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels or the City of Demons, depending on what you want to call it. As you've heard, we've been talking with Joshua P. Warren about some really cool stuff. And right before break, we were talking about his event coming up a week from Saturday, the 13th, right here in Hollywood, Hollywoodland or La La Land, depending on what you want to call it, and about the incredible wishing machines, which is really interesting because I just saw a video. Coincidentally, it wasn't even that I was searching, Mr. Warren out. I just happened to come across this. So I think that we are destined to talk about this. And I do want to come back after we talk about the wishing machines for a bit, come back to the time warps, because that is really mind-boggling. But it's mind-boggling, folks. But at the same time, do you really consider what you just heard as something that you wouldn't have expected to happen? I've been waiting for this news. Literally, I obviously known. I would think that there certain hotspots were naturally occurring or either extraterrestrial made, but regardless, there has to be a logical reason why certain locations have a lot more activity. This could be the answer. But before we get back into that, Joshua, sorry about that. Let's talk more about the wishing machine, because you said something mind-boggling right before that it produces a lot of effects, a lot of results. You said that either you don't understand the technology or that it's the greatest placebo that's ever been produced. What do you think in your own opinion?
Well, in my own opinion, I believe it is a real technology, and I will tell you why. For one thing, okay, let's just start with human thought in general. And of course, we've all heard a lot of these people talk about stuff like the law of attraction, and a lot of people don't like that. But let's just start there, okay? Let's start with the idea of what engineers call sympathetic resonance. So in other words, if we have a room that's empty except for a piano, and one man walks into that room and he bangs a chord on that piano, it resonates within that room. Now, if he walks into that same room, except now we have two pianos that are identical, and he bangs a chord on one piano, the other piano is going to also play that same chord, even though he didn't come close to it. That's called sympathetic resonance. This is demonstrated every day in classrooms. You take two tuning forks, you strike one and hold it close to another one, and the other one starts resonating. This is the most basic form of broadcasting. And so this is, the essence, I think, of how we sort of project something and it returns to us. Now, the question becomes, how can we use a tool to amplify that, to magnify that? Well, these weird little boxes called wishing machines, they have an input plate where you symbolize what you want to manifest, and then they have an output plate which you use to adjust the machine, and there's a number of knobs, usually about 9 knobs, and you go through a simple process of tuning the device once you put your intention there. The key, however, is that inside the box there is a very unusual circuit that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense according to traditional electronics, and that circuit includes a variety of very specially selected quartz crystals. Now, the funny thing about quartz is what engineers call a transducer, meaning that it can take one kind of energy and turn it into another. So if you take a chunk of quartz, for example, and you apply pressure to it, it will produce electricity. On the other hand, if you take that same chunk of quartz and you apply electricity to it, it will resonate and it will form mechanical energy. And that's why we use quartz in electronics, and for that matter, the reason we use all kinds of crystals in electronics. That's why Silicon Valley is called Silicon Valley. We know that crystals have this property. A few years ago, Scientific American published an article about Hitachi having created this magnificent little quartz device that, it's really just a sliver of quartz. I mean, if you take something like a slide that you put under a microscope and you chop it in half so that you just have what looks like a little glass square. That's what this thing looks like, but it's made of quartz. And they were able to store terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data on this little thing, and then expose it to thousands of degrees Fahrenheit of temperature for hours, and it didn't affect it. They claimed that this can store information in this little sliver for thousands, maybe even millions of years. And so I believe that what happens is, somehow or other, when these things, these wishing machines, are properly constructed, that you can tune it and put a certain intention into the machine, and then you can put it away and you can go about your day. You can go have dinner, you can go to sleep, whatever you want, and that machine is sitting there in an automated fashion. It continues sort of thinking about what you want and projecting that. It's I call it automated sympathetic resonance. So this is my theory, okay? Because nobody knows how this works, but this is what I think. And so I believe that when you have a machine that's properly built and you know how to use it properly, which is what I'm going to teach people about in Los Angeles there on the 13th of this month, then you can put a strong intention into one of these, and then it will do the work for you while you get about your day, and it's going 24/7, and it will eventually create the field, if you want to view it that way, that will sort of rearrange what's happening on the physical end into what you want it to be, because essentially all that physical matter does is stick to these non-physical molds that we create with our thoughts. And this is a very literal thing, because we see it with cymatics, where you can create a tone. And let's say, for example, you take a thin sheet of metal and you create an audio tone underneath, and you put sand on there, and the sand snaps into all these patterns. Or you can put something on top of it that's three-dimensional, like a starch and water mixture, and you see the sand, you see that mixture rise up in all of these three-dimensional forms. Matter adheres to a vibrational form. And so my idea here is that the machine helps you create and sustain these forms that somehow shape what you ultimately experience as a physical reality.
I'm actually really glad you mentioned the fact that it automates and stores your intention, because we humans are very fickle in the sense of our emotions. Really, our emotions control everything. And throughout the day, the smallest thing can affect our emotions for the better or for worse. So if you have an intention that goes into this wishing machine, and then let's just say you run out of gas on your way somewhere, you're going to be in a pretty darn mood. So therefore, I would think that the frequency you're resonating, the intention, is probably going to bring you more bad luck, because you're like, oh, I have the worst luck in the world. This happened to me. What's going to happen next, sort of thing. But while you're doing that, this wishing machine actually is working off the first intention that you put in there. That, I would think, alone, just that fact that it's resonating that one intention continuously would be my guess. If people believe in the law of attraction, or whether the technology, that is what's causing that intention to come true. Has anyone ever mentioned that before to you, or I'm guessing you probably even thought of the possibility that we ourselves as humans change our intentions throughout the day subconsciously, and can affect this negatively if we didn't have this. But when I mean affect it negatively, I'm talking about affecting what we draw to ourselves naturally.
Well, Dr. J, you phrased it beautifully. And that's a great way of giving this example, that yes, when you're in the right state of mind, you put it there into this transducer, and it continues resonating that thing, and you can go and have the worst day of your life, and it doesn't matter, because, like you said, humans are fickle creatures. So you see, the problem with us humans is that we are constantly sending out signals, And that's just one way of viewing it. It might not be that simplistic and Newtonian and linear. It might be more of a quantum thing. But one way or another, view it like this. You're sending out signals, and you have no control over that. You are going to send out signals. So do you want those signals to be noise, or do you want to tune them into music? And so what this machine does is help you take a moment when you tune that into a stream of music and let that keep transmitting or flowing into the universe, while you then go back into your perhaps scatterbrained sort of lifestyle with all these distractions bombarding you. And I want to give you, a couple examples of just some of my own personal experiences. And by the way, if you go to joshuapwarren.com and click around and end up looking at the wishing machine page, you'll see a lot of free information that I've provided, educational information, but a lot of testimonials also from people who have had amazing experiences. But let me just tell you a couple quick ones that I've had. I bought my very first wishing machine almost 20 years ago. I bought it from a man in California for $300. And at that time, I bought it just because I'm a geek. I love anything that is weird, any kind of gadget, if it's got some knobs and switches, I'm there. And so I had no expectation. I didn't know if it was going to work or not work. I just wanted to say, look at this weird thing I bought. So I bought this thing for $300, and I thought I was being really smart, because as soon as I got it, I said, I'm going to wish for my $300 back, right? And so I got it, and that's what I did. I literally got it and wished for my $300 back. And 3 days later, I got a call from a big resort in my area. I'll just tell you, it was the Grove Park Inn Resort and Spa. And they told me they had a group of dentists coming in, and they were looking for someone who would give a 45-minute presentation about the history of Asheville, and they were paying $300. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting that it just so happened to be the exact amount? And so that really piqued my curiosity. And from there, I started seeing this happen again and again and again, all the way. And this is my favorite story of all. And I could tell you so many. But I love to snorkel and scuba dive and all that kind of stuff, which is one of the reasons, having the Bermuda Triangle Research Base in Puerto Rico has always been such a godsend and such a fun thing for me. I love to go into the Caribbean and swim around. So anyhow, a few years ago, I had a nice little condo there in Puerto Rico, and my sister Jessica, my only sibling, she had never been to Puerto Rico. So I said, you got to come down here. I'll take you snorkeling, right? So in the meantime, I was contacted by this man in Canada who had bought one of these wishing machines. And he said, I am a metal detector. He says, I love to go out as a hobby and I detect metal, but I've never found anything made of gold with diamonds and stuff like that. And he goes, I put this intention into my machine that I wanted to find something gold with maybe some diamonds or whatever. And he goes, I went out when metal detected, and he said, I found this bracelet, this gold bracelet that had some diamonds in it. And I thought, well, man, that's a cool idea. So I'm going to do that too. So I set up my machine. So I want to find something gold, at least something gold. So anyway, my sister comes down within a week. My wife and I go out to snorkel with her at this little island they call Gilligan's Island. Beautiful little tiny island. You got to take well, let me put it this way. There's nothing commercial. Okay, there's no restaurant. There's nothing. I mean, it's owned by the territory of Puerto Rico. There's a couple of porta potties there. That's it. All you have is what you bring with you. We go there on a Monday. There's nobody else around. At one point, I went out into the water and I sat down where this just crystal clear aquamarine water is up to my neck, and I'm just like chilling out, feeling like I'm in heaven. And as a matter of fact, at one point, Lauren came over and she sat down next to me, and we're like, this is so nice. Well, Lauren is a big seashell person. And so I started feeling around in the sand to see if I could find a nice seashell. I always do that when she's around. And I'm like, this is something weird. And I pluck out of the sand a men's 14-karat gold ring with 9 diamonds in it that just so happens to perfectly fit my ring finger. Okay?
Wow.
Is my size. Lauren sees that and she's like, what the? Yeah, she goes, are you kidding me? And she thought I was just messing with her. I was like, no, I just pulled this out of the sand. And I've never found anything in the sand before. And we were just flipping out. Then Lauren goes and finds this beautiful silver bracelet like 30 minutes later. And to this day, when I go to the casinos here in Las Vegas, a lot of times I'll put that ring on. I'm like, this is my lucky ring, you know, and I'll go in and I'll win money like left and right. And so stuff like that happens to you that, again, to me, there's no way of explaining this away as just some kind of random coincidence. This is the kind of thing that happens when you know how to use a wishing machine, and that's why I've been using them every day of my life. I'm living proof. Well, not of my life, but every day since I got that one, I use them every day. I've got 10 of them running right now on 10 different wishes, and I have a life like you wouldn't believe, and I think it's in part because of the wishing machines.
How many wishing machines are available in the public right now, and is it hard to replicate, and how much does it cost to replicate?
It is very rare and very weird. I mean, these things are handmade, and there are a lot of people out there who will sell wishing machines for $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000. And what I found was that this gentleman who calls himself Dr. Mulder, interestingly enough, because he values his privacy. He lives in South Carolina, and Dr. Mulder, he's another X-Files fan, as you can tell from listening to his name or hearing his name. You got to understand, if you get a reputation for being a guy who builds wishing machines, people start beating a path to your door, and I mean, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking. So he likes to keep his privacy. He started building these machines and sending them to me, and they were the most effective, fast-acting ones I've ever seen or worked with in my entire life. And so he was the guy that I wanted to partner up with, but we were talking about it, and we were like, this should not be something that costs thousands of dollars. Let's get something that people can actually afford, because I'm interested not mainly in making money, frankly, but because there are a lot of easier ways to make money than talking about wishing machines. That's a weirdo topic. I said, let's create a project where people can get these things that you make, because I've never made a wishing machine, that you make. I'll tell people what it is. I'll educate them about it. And that at that point, we'll keep track of them and keep track of what their experiences are. And so anyway, he started making machines that are sold through our websites for $199 with a money-back guarantee. And let me tell you, thousands of people around the world have these things, and we have learned so much from studying the results that these folks have had.
I could keep going and asking about the amazing wishes, but your story about you and Lauren in Puerto Rico is freaking amazing. But here is an interesting wish. I'm very curious if anyone has ever wished this, or have you wished this, or at least has been talked about. Has anybody wished to be abducted by extraterrestrials, or be contacted by them, or have a UFO come to them?
Oh, I've done that, and I videotaped it.
Oh, okay. You answered my question. How many times, and can you tell us about the time you videotaped it, or was it more than once?
Well, I only got to videotape it once, but we've had this success twice. Dr. Mulder and I have worked together on a number of occasions to try to enhance or even create paranormal phenomena with witnesses around. And the first time we tried this was when I led an expedition to Transylvania and Romania, where we spent over a week exploring all of Vlad the Impaler's old castles and domains. And I gave him some blueprints of one of the castles, and he pinpointed certain places where we were going to set the wishing machines to enhance activity. He and I were the only ones who knew about those spots. And sure enough, those were the spots where people started seeing most of the apparitions and having pebbles thrown at them and all kinds of weird things, which is very well documented because I videotaped everybody talking about it, and we have footage of it happening. But furthermore, here's the most incredible thing when it comes to UFOs. So on the anniversary of the WOW signal, and of course, there's no need to get into the whole story of what the WOW signal is. Any listener who doesn't know can look that up. On the anniversary of the WOW signal, I was in Puerto Rico, not too far from the Arecibo Observatory, big UFO hotspot. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to do an experiment where we send a message to space, for lack of a better word, and say, we want you to appear at this spot at this time and give GPS coordinates and everything. And I had ham radio operators also who were sending out this message, transmitting it. But the wishing machine was, we wanted to separate the wishing machine. And so I created a separate set of coordinates for the wishing machine. And I had a video camera running at this spot all day long. As a matter of fact, it was a live webcam. That was part of the thrill. People could just, sit there and watch the sky all day if they wanted to. And at one point, Lauren and I heard this incredible, weird, like screeching, whistling sound that was coming from the speakers of my computer from the live feed. And I go over, I'm like, what the heck is that? And I didn't see anything, but then the whistling stopped. Well, I had my filmmaking buddy, C. Eric Scott, up in Washington, D.C., who was there analyzing everything live all day. And he goes, oh, my God, did you see what just happened? I said, no. He sends me this clip. And in this clip, and if you want to see this, if you go to joshuapwarren.com, again, click that link that says Gallery of the Strange. It's somewhere on there under Puerto Rico UFOs or Arecibo Project. I don't know. I've got a bunch of stuff. But anyway, you will see this object. It looks like a kind of a black disc-shaped object that just it descends from the sky. And it goes right down to the camera. At the same time, there's this big whistling, screeching sound, and then it shoots straight up. And there's, let me tell you something. I am a photographic expert when it comes to analyzing. I can analyze and look for bugs, birds, raindrops. I mean, you name it. I photograph that stuff all the time with different kinds of cameras, different frame rates, different shutter speeds, different exposures. I know what that stuff looks like. This was something different. This came straight down out of the sky and shot straight back up into the sky while it created this interference or whatever this noise was. That was amazing. And then we decided, okay, let's replicate this with a big crowd of people. So I was doing this event in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and so we told everybody, okay, I think it was 10 o'clock p.m., we want everybody to go outside this resort where the event was taking place, and we're going to look up in the sky, and we're going to just see, if something appears. And so I was videotaping. We had a big crowd of people out there. Dave Schrader was out there, Josh Gates from Expedition Unknown. I mean, all these people are out there, and all of a sudden the crowd goes bonkers, and they start freaking out. Because everybody, well, not everybody, I would say probably at least half of the crowd said that they saw some kind of a big ball of light that appeared for like 3 seconds and then shot away into the sky. I don't have video footage of that, but the point is I could give you other examples of how when we're talking about these machines, we're not just talking about, the normal stuff that people might use it for, like, oh, I want more money or I want a better job or whatever. No, you can use this for some pretty wild stuff, but we still don't know what the limitations are.
I'm going to try to tie in a topic from last hour with a wishing machine. Have you ever used a wishing machine and created a wish with one of these time warps, that specifically the one in Nevada that you found?
No, I have not. And I think, for one thing, it's not occurred to me. So once again, thank you for suggesting an idea. But and you know what? That's kind of odd. It's like you can get to the point where these wishing machines become so familiar to you, and they do so many good things in your life that you kind of forget about them sometimes, you know. And there are times where maybe I'm having a challenge with a project or whatever, and then somebody goes, "Well, use the wishing machine." I'm like, "Oh, duh," you know, and I go and I use it, but in this particular case, I kind of don't want to feel like that I am influencing the outcome in some way. I know that I have the power to possibly do that based upon my past experience. And I know that you're doing that anyway as just a living, you know, human being. I believe we're all oblivious gods, that we have the power to shape reality in profound ways that we're not even aware of. But that said, I think it probably makes me personally feel a little more like I'm actually capturing something objective, to just go out there and measure it without me trying to feel like I'm creating it.
That's actually a very good point. Considering that it is something natural and you have all these people who have seen something there, which was really crazy when you told that story about that package. That will never come out of my mind. Very creepy, somebody opening up and leaving a note. But back to time warps. I know you said you wanted to take, I believe you said it was the DT machine, right? And you wanted to go to other locations and try to find any more time warps. Have you been able to identify any? I would think they're all over the world, specifically where hotspots, maybe even in Arecibo. Have you been able to identify any others?
Well, you know, I just made this discovery in June. So this is pretty fresh. And so what I'm doing first off is just traveling around Nevada. And because I think it's important to gather as many, at very least, sort of control measurements in this particular region. And by the way, I've had plenty of people who contact me, who criticize me, who say, "Oh, come on, you only have gotten one reading. You can't draw any conclusions from that." So my response to that is, well, that's true. I mean, this is my first point of data, but I'm going to continue, you know, traveling, and I'm sure I'll get other data points, and I could just keep this to myself and not talk about it. You know, if you don't want to know, fine. But I'd rather be sort of transparent and tell people what's happening, so they can sort of enjoy this journey of exploration with me. I also want to point out that I have used this DT meter when it's 115 degrees outside. I've used it in the middle of a raging thunder and lightning storm, and it's done nothing at all extraordinary. When I told Ronald Heath, the inventor, about my reading, he flipped out because he said, "I've had two of these things running on property in California for months, logging their results 24 hours a day onto computers." And he says, "I've never gotten one single anomaly." And he said, "This is huge that you used this machine and got this anomaly at that spot." I mean, it's a really incredible thing. And so it shows you how potentially rare this is to be at the right place at the right time. But I eventually plan to travel as widely as possible to all kinds of different hotspots around the world, some lesser known, some extremely famous. But I view this as an opportunity to take so many of these places that I have explored over the past 25 years and to go back and revisit them now with a whole new set of eyes and a whole new way of collecting what could be a profound set of data.
I would like to keep going down the rabbit hole of both the wishing machine and, of course, the time warps, because I have a lot more we could talk about them, but we're coming close. So I do want to ask a big question. You did mention what you're going to do with a lot of the traveling. Now, you've obviously stumbled across or came across, or maybe this is another way to put it, maybe something, a force, because you've been drawn to this paranormal research. Maybe something wanted you to find it. Maybe this is your path. I mean, that is definitely something to consider. But what other what else would you research while you're traveling aside from these time warps? What else are you working on? What's the next big step for you?
I feel like that the whole purpose of this field that people often call paranormal research is to understand the relationship between the mind and the environment and energy and matter, and how that we can use our minds to create a better world. I find it sad that people are so fixated on politics these days, because what politicians do is the product, it's the result of their behavior. But if we understand our fundamental, and you can even call it spiritual, relationship with the universe, then that will ultimately determine how people behave when they get into positions to turn that behavior into action. And so we need to start sort of stop distracting ourselves as much with the physical and political end of things, and start giving at least equal attention to the spiritual development of our relationship with reality, and where we come from and why we're here and what we want this experience to be like. And so I believe looking at that relationship between how one frequency that is non-physical is able to slip over into that state where it is physical and then back again, what I mentioned earlier as transduction, is the real key here. Because if we can figure out how something extreme happens, like how a ghost manifests, or how some kind of an extraterrestrial or interdimensional might be able to manipulate all of these forces around us, well, that's pretty wild and sensational stuff. But if you can apply that to your own life in order to improve your life, well, isn't that the point? I mean, shouldn't that be the point of all research, regardless of what it is, to improve our lives and make the world a better place? And so I feel like that the more I'm able to understand about how to take one frequency, the frequency of thought and consciousness and spirit, and shift it into the physical frequency, the more we are going to understand how to shape the real world experience. And so one of the big specific projects that I'm working on right now, that I should have some big news about probably within maybe a couple months, I'm hoping, is the next step in a field of research that I created called paracymatics. And essentially what that is about is taking different tones that will create patterns that can be used as magical sigils. That's one way of putting it, and I use the word magical in quotations. But I'm taking it to the next level. And the next level is I'm working on a machine right now, and I'm so close. I'm 90% of the way there. I guarantee you I'm going to have this done in a few months. A machine that will allow me to take any image, a crop circle, a hieroglyph, even an ancient manuscript, condense it into a beam of light that I can then condense into a sound that will then create a pattern that will create a symbol. And this symbol will be a representation. So we're going to be able to hear the image that we start with, and then we're going to be able to see what the picture of that image is if we combine it all into one symbol. And then we can reverse that process to some degree, I hope, where we can take that symbol and we can do the opposite, and we can work our way back to the image. And this is going to show us something about the relationship between light and sound and vibration, and how all those things shift from one state to another and then back again. And this is going to open up an entirely new field of research, and I am delighted to be the person to introduce everyone to this, because I cannot wait to come back on Dr. J and let everybody hear what a crop circle sounds like, or what a hieroglyph sounds like, etc. So that's something I should have ready within a few months.
And I honestly cannot wait for that. And you being at the forefront of this is going to be great, because one of the things you just mentioned of is people should really be not worrying about, you mentioned the politicians right now. You have the angry Democrats really projecting these negative thoughts instead of what we should be thinking about, like you said, trying to make the world a better place. I really think a lot of the children and grandchildren of the future are sort of getting whisked away, and we're not worrying about it as much. With the mind, I know there is so much more there. I don't think we're even ready to comprehend the power of it. And when you look at these extraterrestrials controlling their craft, controlling their technology, and humans and other animals, mammals, I don't even know what exists on other planets that they're communicating with and shutting down with their mind. But when we reach that level, where, as a matter of fact, according to Harry Reid, we are at that level. But when this research or technology comes to the forefront of everybody, then I really think we will finally stop destructing and actually start, just like Mr. Foster Gamble says, stop surviving and actually start thriving. One last thing I wanted to say real quick. I'm really glad you mentioned sigils. That is something very few people talk about, and I just talked to someone about it last night who had no idea what they are. So you're really on top of things. Now, I know we've already gone over the time, so I guess this would be logical place to say thank you. But more importantly, real quick, let's talk about your website and the event next Saturday again.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and gosh, thank you so much for having me on this program. And yes, I hope that as many of your listeners as possible will come and hang out with me in person. This is a big celebratory event for me, because this is going to be my final wishing machine extravaganza. I'm very happy to say I just recently signed a contract for a big TV project that's going to be keeping me busy for quite a while. So I'm not going to be doing any more speaking engagements for the foreseeable future. So if you come to Los Angeles, come to Hollywood on Saturday, October the 13th from 2 to 4 p.m., I will blow your mind. I'm telling you, I'm going to show you things. It's going to be fun. It will not be boring. If you found this conversation interesting, then this whets your appetite for what to expect on October 13th. It's the Wishing Machine Extravaganza. We're digging as deeply as possible into the relationship between the mind, the body, the environment. I'm going to give you tools that will help you start changing your reality. Everybody's going to get a free gift. And if you go to joshuapwarren.com, you'll see a link at the top of the page. It's in big yellow letters that'll give you all the info. Go there, read about it, watch the videos, and hopefully you can grab one of those tickets, and I look forward to meeting you in person.
And tomorrow, or anybody, check out the website or hear this in the archives. If you go to my website, you will also see that same link. I will have my webmasters work on it. And remember, folks, the only thing you need to remember for this show is the name of the show. How can you mess that up? Dr. J Radio Live. That is DRJ Radio Live, for instance. drjradiolive.com. Okay, I'm going to spit out everything at once. The same thing at DRJ Radio Live. We have Minds, Facebook, YouTube, Google, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, Instagram, you name it, there's an account. Buffer is another one. The point is, folks, it's pretty easy to remember whatever you need about this show. It's the name of it. Tomorrow, join us live. We have a former BBC reporter, Tony Gosling, talking about the Bilderbergers. This is the first time he'll be joining us live in this run while I'm back. But if you want to hear what he talks about, it is available on YouTube. I do believe we have crossed over our time. So with that being said, I have to thank the fine folks at Late Night in the Midlands, Katie and Daryl Neely, for working so hard, and of course on air and off air for making this happen, and my good friend in the United Kingdom, JC at Deep Program Radio. To all you listeners out there, I really do hope that you really were intrigued, as I am, about the wishing machines, and do make it to Joshua P. Warren's event on Saturday the 13th, because I know it's going to be mind-boggling. I really look forward to hearing from those of you who are there, and tell me what experiences you had there. I guess with that being said, folks, I am sorry for going over the time. Stay tuned for the next show, and I will catch you tomorrow night.